And now we cut across to the book launch of Life, Death and the Ashtavakra Gita with Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman.
Of timeless wisdom of ancient texts that profoundly impact our lives. By weaving together Dr. Bibek Debroy's scholarly translation with personal reflections of Professor Hindol Sengupta, the book invites readers to engage with the timeless teachings of the Ashtavakra Gita and explore their relevance in contemporary life. Our esteemed panelists, with their wealth of knowledge and experience, will undoubtedly provide invaluable insights into the Gita's timeless message. At this point in time, I now hand over the floor to Sri Rishi Suri, a seasoned journalist and co-founder of the publishing startup Krin, to moderate the enlightening discussion. And with this, I thank you once again and welcome you once again. Over to you, Sri.
Thank you, Ushaji. Good evening, distinguished guests, esteemed authors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rishi Suri, and I have the honor of being your host and the publisher of this wonderful book we are here to release today. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this significant occasion, the launch of Life, Death and the Ashtavakra Gita, written by the Venerable Dr. Bibek Debroy and the brilliant Dr. Hindol Sengupta. We're deeply honored to celebrate the profound wisdom embedded in this text, which has been thoughtfully reinterpreted by our authors for today's world. At Grin Publishing, our message is clear: to retell the stories of Bharat, our beloved India, to a new generation. India is a treasure trove of knowledge with a history that spans millennia and holds the wisdom of countless traditions. This rich and diverse heritage is something we believe that should not only be cherished but shared with the rest of the world. We feel a deep responsibility to bring these narratives to life and to take them to a global audience, ensuring that the timeless teachings of Bharat resonate far beyond its borders. We are privileged to have collaborated with the India International Center today to co-host this event. Their partnership means a lot to us, and we are very grateful for their support. A special thank you to NewsX, our media partner, for helping us share this moment, reaching a much wider audience. I would especially like to thank and express our heartfelt gratitude to the Honorable Finance Minister of India, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji, for her gracious presence here today and for agreeing to launch this book. Her support for this endeavor is truly invaluable. And now, without further ado, I invite Nirmala ji, Bibekta and Hindol to release the book. May I now request Nirmala ji to please deliver her keynote address.
Good evening, and I thank the publisher and also the authors for thinking it's fit to have me here, because the scholarship about which I hesitatingly start talking about makes me feel that it is upfront a confession that is just a reader's presence here and nothing to do with the minister, and certainly nothing to do with, I can say this, nothing to do with Nirmala Sitharaman. Because we're talking about Ashtavakra Gita. Before I really get into talking a few words about the book, I know you're going to have very scholarly discussions. I would have loved to be here to hear it all. But about the few things that I've extracted from this book, before I get into that, I certainly want to say there is a quiver in my heart even as I say. Talking about Bibek Debroy is just not possible in my own limited vocabulary. He's a scholar. He may call himself just a translator, but the extent to which and the prolific writing that he engages in all makes me feel that he's got something divine about himself. Otherwise, it is just not possible to keep writing. It's not churning out books. He's writing about things on which good scholars have taken years to complete a book, and here we go, a very sound translation of not simple texts, but of something which has been considered over the millennium as being the vision for India, and therefore it's with a certain humility that I stand here before him, and the audacity with which I'm going to talk about the work he's done. I confess, I feel it is a great honor that the writers have bestowed on me. Just to capture what Bibek Debroy is doing. Okay, he's a chairman of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. He's had excellent record as an economist. He's done so much, he's writing so much. At one point in time, he's writing about dogs. Another point in time, he writes about railways. A third time, he's writing about what is the expenditure account of the government. And with the same felicity, here we go, he writes in a monthly magazine about sacred themes, whether it is about Ma Shakti or whether it is about Shiva. So he does all this. And all of us keep reading, and sometimes you have to reread it, a third reading and so on. But look at what he's done. He's the only person living in this era, and the second in the last few centuries, to have translated both the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the unabridged versions. I'm sure all of you know it, but I take it upon myself as my duty to lay it before you, the expanse that we're talking about of the work that Bibek Debroy has done. So the only person, and if you were to compare centuries, then of course the only second person who has done unabridged form version translation of Mahabharata and Ramayana. Then he's translated Puranas, the Bhagavata Purana, Markandeya Purana, Brahma Purana, Vishnu Purana, Shiva Purana, and Brahmanda Purana. And I'm sure more is coming. We'll have to just keep adding to the list. He's also translated Harivamsa and all the Vedas. So it is a remarkable fortune for me to stand here and talk about the work he's done. And this current one, together with Hindol, who himself has published more than 12 publications. I mean, for me, a 1,000-word article might take a couple of hours. And here are prolific writers and writing on topics which are quite dense, quite intense to read. So Hindol himself has done excellent work in publishing his works. He teaches, and he's also a member of the Observer Research Foundation. So, without going further into their, biodata, they brought us a small volume of what an excellent work. I'm able to talk about it with some confidence because from childhood at home, little portions of Ashtavakra Gita is taught in our homes. How much you absorb, how much is kept in your head, how much you are able to relate to it is a different issue. So I compared myself with that well worn out book at home, which is used by my grandfather, used by my parents, my mama and mommy, and which I occasionally look to read. But what Bibek has done is to make it absolutely simpler for us to use. So in current English, so you have the 20 chapters being translated and in simple English for us to follow. And then a contemplative reading of the Ashtavakra Gita by Hindol. And it relates to the current period because both of them have done this during COVID and not necessarily confined to the experiences of the COVID period, before it and after it, but essentially during it. So, again, something which all of us know, 200 Gitas are there. Ashtavakra Gita is one among them. We tend to think that Gita is only Bhagavad Gita, but there are so many. And in this, the feature is, in Bhagavad Gita, you have Krishna and Arjuna, Samvada, where Krishna is answering all the doubts, the questions of Arjuna. Here, it's a dialogue. I won't say there's a role reversal. There is certainly a dialogue between the Guru, who's Ashtavakra, and the king, Janaka. So it's very interesting, very simple. But of course, it is about things which are not mundane, so you read and reread. And in the course of reading, you get to see that because it is talking about life, as is in Ashtavakra Gita, and about death, it somewhere conveys, you need to have, that was mentioned also earlier, a certain sense of jnana. Without jnana, you're not going to be able to relate to this. It's not just knowledge, it's much more than that. And also have vairagya, meaning a certain level of detachment to attain the benefits which are being highlighted through Ashtavakra Gita. So I'll just sort of put it before you. The beauty of what happens in a living religion like Hinduism. At home, when we all sit around to have our food, earlier on the floor with mats laid and all that, and then subsequently on the dining table, the first thing anyone at home, some elder at home would do is to say a verse which at that time as a child, myself and a few others have questioned, saying, hey, we are hungry, we want food. But there is a 2-line verse which says, I want the food, but not just to fill your stomach. The verse doesn't say filling your stomach. But your elders tell you that yes, you need the food for your hunger, but there's something else for which you need to live, and that is what you have to attain. And that verse, I'm sure every one of you have heard it, Annapurne Sadapurne Shankara Pranavallabe Jnana Vairagya Siddhyartham Bhiksham Dehi Parvati. So only for the sake of attaining jnana and for the sake of vairagya, give me that bhiksha. So when you sit and eat your food, it's the general thing about children to say, what jnana and vairagya? I want food because I'm hungry. But it generally gets into you, it grows in you. So it's not just the food for your hunger, the food which has to give you gradually as you're growing a certain sense of, rising above all the, the gunas and the doshas, and then saying, I had to obtain the jnana. And the sense of detachment which has to be built in you, which has to grow in you. It can't just be taken up like that, read a book and therefore I've got the detachment. Cannot happen. So jnana vairagya siddhyartham bhikshandehi, that is fine. But later comes, even in this book, a reference to what actually is the discussion about death. Because Ashtavakra is talking about a lot of things, and I'll just highlight 2 of my observations subsequently from the book. But talking of death has never been a negative thing. A young Markandeya, a young Nachiketa could all speak about it. and ask questions about what's death and to who. No less a person than Yama himself. So that is also referred here, which is very interesting because the observation and the answers which Nachiketas receives. If earlier you're talking about how to attain Vairagya, how to attain Jnana, through Nachiketas, which is referred to here, but really that's not part of the Ashtavakra, the fear of death or what happens after death, Yama answers for Nachiketas. And what does he say? If you need to know the truth about what happens after death, and this is Yama saying to Nachiketas, it is to know that there is no death at all. Because if you're a consciousness, the pure consciousness in you, that will, your body decays, anything else goes away, but that consciousness lives. So he says there's no death. And to continuously debate within yourself to understand this, and as you mix up this life-related discussion to what the death-related message is, you really have a fantastic realm where there's no negativity, there's no fear, and there is clearly something which is well within your hands to do. And so, without taking much time more to talk about it, scholars are here, I just highlight that set of 3 verses which really tells me that message which I have to mull over every day, and by mulling over, I'm sure it'll become a part of me to know that I don't need to see the outcomes of everything I do to feel sorry or feel elated. So the message, I just saw a commonality where Janaka speaks. He constantly says, I reside in that state which is yata sukham, that which is comfortable to me. What is to me being comfortable? Not sitting on a sofa. When I have literally sort of renounced attachment and I accept, so then I live comfortably. Similarly, he says, yata sukham, when I reside in purushartha, the duty that I have to perform, and the body can lead to distress, or my tongue can cause exhaustion because you're talking, you're claiming, you're doing things. No, but when these two are out and I'm just doing my purushartha, I reside in comfort. Yata sukham. This is all Janaka is saying. He also says, and this is very profound, and I think if each one of us mull over it, really, your everyday, sorry to say, nonsense which goes around doesn't make much of a sense to me. And I'm sure we can repeatedly go back every time. One of the verses in chapter 13:3 says, in truth, nothing is ever done. So it's not you doing, it's not me doing, it's not anybody doing. In truth, nothing is ever done. Thinking about this, Janaka says, thinking about this, I do whatever tasks present itself. The task present themselves before me, and I just do that. So I do whatever task presents itself. Having done it, I reside comfortably in anything. Again, he goes into residing comfortably. Yata sukham. So everything that in chapter 13 he talks about in this dialogue, he says, how does he get into that yata sukham position or state? And therefore he goes on saying this. And finally he says, for yogis who possess bodies, karma and refraining from karma lead to states of bondage. If you're a yogi, that is, bereft of association and disassociation, I reside comfortably in anything. Again, reside comfortably. If you have to reside comfortably, detachment, let go. These are the ways in which Janaka literally gives you the key to live yatha sukham. Position yourself yatha sukham. He tells you that. Interestingly, in chapter 15, Ashtavakra, when he gives his response, he participates in the ongoing dialogue, uses Sukham Chara as a refrain in every verse. Roam around happily, he says. How do you roam around happily? There are several verses, but one which really sort of lingers in me. And since I received this book, I've had about 4 readings. Not from page to page, first page to the last page, but I've gone backwards for this one verse. I humbly submit, each one of us should mull over this particular verse's translation, a simple, crystal clear translation, 15:4. You're not the body. You're not the body, Ashtavakra says. The body is not yours. You're not the enjoyer or the doer. Your form is that of pure consciousness. Your form is that of pure consciousness. You're the constant witness. Imagine this line. You're the constant witness. Indifferent. You're a witness, but you're not involved in it. Roam around happily. Just cannot get this out of my head. Maybe not verbatim, but it lingers so much. And I seek your indulgence. I want to repeat this verse. You're not the body. The body is not yours. You're not the enjoyer or the doer. Your form is that of a pure consciousness. You are the constant witness, indifferent. Roam around happily. The one last verse, again from chapter 15. And this 15:18. In the ocean that is the world, in the ocean that is the world, there was, there is, and will be only one. You do not possess bondage or emancipation. You do not have anything to do or anything not to do. Roam happily. Amazing. Just one word of appreciation to the publisher. I understand they're a startup coming to the mundane. The policies of the government have helped for a startup to be able to, come to publish such wealth of India. I'm indeed grateful to the publisher. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nirmala ji. Also, you mentioned Nachiketa, and you'll be very pleased to know that the next book we're publishing is on Nachiketa. Now, may I request Dr. Bibek Debroy to please deliver his remarks.
Honorable Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs, Nirmala Sitharaman ji. Rishi Suri, my friend and co-author Hindol Sengupta. Having just heard that speech, you realize why we opted to have Nirmala Sitharaman and not the Finance Minister to be the chief guest to launch this book. I don't play golf. I don't think Hindol does either. Those who play golf often make deals on the golf course. For me, many deals are made over lunch or dinner. So roughly when COVID was raging, Hindol and I were at a lit fest and we were having dinner. And Hindol said, I'm reading the Ashtavakra Gita and I feel very intensely about it. I said, good. Let's do a joint book on the Ashtavakra Gita. I'll do the translation. You do your personal reflections on the Ashtavakra Gita. Some people who know that I have done this Ashtavakra Gita have asked me, what has happened to your Purana project? Nirmala ji mentioned that Purana project. Let me assure everyone, including Prashant who's sitting there, that the Purana project is very much on. The copy editing for the Kurma Purana is going on, which will be the 7th in the series, will be out fairly soon. But as a subsidiary, there is now a Gita project. And the reason being that everyone, as Nirmala ji said, everyone talks about the Bhagavad Gita. But there are around 200 other Gitas altogether. The 25 odd Gitas from the Mahabharata I've already translated last year in a book called Sacred Songs. And I intend to translate the others also, of which the Ashtavakra Gita is a standalone Gita. It is not from any of the standard texts. It is not from the Puranas. It is not from the Adhyata Ramayana, the Yoga Vasishta Ramayana. It is not from the Upa Puranas. It is a completely standalone text. So we have just done the Ashtavakra Gita. And Hindol and I, since we haven't fought so far, plan to follow this up with the Devi Gita, to be published, hopefully again by Grin. You just have to grin and bear it. We know nothing about Ashtavakra, the Rishi Ashtavakra, or King Janaka from the Ashtavakra Gita itself. It starts just like that. It ends just like that. We know about King Janaka from other sources. And because the Ashtavakra Gita is not generally that well known, let me explain that this King Janaka is not Sita's father. Sita's father is Sirodhvaj. All the kings of that particular lineage in Mithila were known as Janaka. That dynasty was set up by a king named Nimi. And Nimi was cursed for a reason I don't have time to explain, that he would cease to have a body. So Nimi became Videha, without a body. And hence that dynasty of Videha, that kingdom of Videha. Nimi thereafter obtained a boon that although he would not have a body, he would live on in our eyelashes, in the blinking of the eye, which is why the blinking of the eye is called Nimesha. Nimi's son was Mithi, and Mithi built the city that we know as Mithila. But as I said, King Janaka, we know nothing from the text itself, this text itself. We know independently that once his palace was burned down, and King Janaka was delighted. Not delighted in the sense of Nero, but he was delighted because he would no longer be attached to his possessions. Anyway, that is Janaka. What about Ashtavakra? Ashtavakra, we know again nothing from the text. There are references to him in the Valmiki Ramayana and other texts, but the real story about Ashtavakra is from the Mahabharata. And we are told in the Mahabharata that his father was a sage named Kahoda. Kahoda was instructing his wife Sujata about the Vedas. And Ashtavakra was still inside the stomach. And from inside the stomach, he corrected his father's pronunciation. So his father became very angry and cursed him that he would be born crooked in 8 of his limbs. Hence, Ashtavakra, crooked in 8 parts. And a standard picture of Ashtavakra that exists shows him crooked in 8 limbs. But Sanskrit grammar is beautiful. So Ashtavakra as a sandhi is crooked in 8 limbs. As a Shashti Tatpuru Samasa, it means Ashtavakra, someone who is upright in 8 different ways, which is the way I at least prefer to think of Ashtavakra. This is a remarkable text. It's a remarkable text. It's a text on Advaita Vedanta. It is a text that is easy to read. It is a text that is extremely difficult to understand. And it is a text it is almost impossible to imbibe. Even if you read it, reread it, and reread it. It is unlike Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is clear in some sense that Sri Krishna is the Guru and Arjuna is the Shishya. Here it is not quite that. The Ashtavakra Gita starts almost suggesting that King Janaka is the Shishya and Ashtavakra is the Guru. In the Mahabharata we are told that Ashtavakra went to King Janaka's court, and in the Mahabharata he comes across as a child, 10 or 12 years old, as much more of a Guru. Here there is no such sense, because soon it becomes a dialogue between two equals. It all starts off with Janaka asking a simple question. Nirmala ji already alluded to the question from other parts. Janaka asks Ashtavakra, Katham jnanam avapnoti, katham muktihi bhavishyati, vairagyam va katham praptam etad bruhi mama prabho. O Lord, please tell me, how do I get jnana? How do I get mukti? And how do I get vairagya? These are important questions. These are very difficult questions to answer, because they involve asking, who is the person who is seeking mukti? Whose vairagya are you talking about? And what on earth is mukti? And the discussion goes on. I will quote only another shloka from the Ashtavakra Gita, which again endorses what Nirmala ji quoted from a different part. Yadi dehang prithak kritta chiti visramatishthasi adhunaiva sukhi shanta bandha mukta bhavishyasi. If you can separate yourself from a body and rest in your consciousness, right now you will be sukhi, happy, shanta, serene, bandha mukta bhavishyasi, free from bondage. There is a classic shloka from the Ashtavakra Gita, which I will not quote in Sanskrit. It essentially says, Ya mati sa gati bhavet. Your destination is whatever your inclination is like. If you think yourself to be bound, you will be bound. If you think yourself to be free, you will be free. The Ashtavakra Gita has been translated earlier also, but to best of our knowledge, it has been translated by people who belong to religious orders. I think this is the first translation. Secular is not a particularly acceptable word, but this is probably the first secular translation of the Ashtavakra Gita. It is not a commentary. If someone wants a commentary, then you had better read Swami Nityaswarupananda or Swami Chinmayananda. At one level, this is an introduction to the Ashtavakra Gita. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bibek. That was enlightening as always. Now may I please request Hindol to deliver his remarks.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so grateful. First, I must say how grateful I am that Nirmala ji came. India, and I see a lot of younger people here, many people have forgotten that Indian politics has a long history of extremely erudite politicians, but also politicians who genuinely loved books, loved reading. This is a long tradition in Indian politics. And I think we couldn't think of a better person who exemplifies that tradition than Nirmala ji. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for being here. I have to begin by saying that I first met Bibek Debroy about 20 years ago, maybe 25, when I was a rookie reporter. And I have told Shuparnadi, his wife, the story many, many times, because I think I'm still a bit scared of him. We were rookie reporters. I was a rookie business reporter. Dr. Debroy, I forget what he was doing at that time, but there was this press conference and he was addressing it. And I remember there were 2 or 3 of us who asked questions. And to each of us, Dr. Debroy first explained to us why our question itself was wrong, how the premises were all wrong, and therefore any answer he could possibly give us would not hold any steam, as it were, because what we were asking were wrong. And I think from that time onwards, one has always been a bit scared of Vivek. But let me say this. One finds gurus in many places in our tradition. And I think of this project really, for many of us who do this work, which is to really try and take, as I was telling the Honorable Minister, to try and take what we call India's eternal knowledge, India's eternal stories, and make them available to new generations, new people, not only in India, but around the world, in new language, giving them new idioms, so to speak, and new grammar. For all of us, I think Bibek Debroy is a guru figure. We would have to be honest to accept that. He did this longer than any of us. We began by learning how to do this by looking at his work, and therefore for me, it's a great honor. I wrote the Ashtavakra Gita and my thoughts on it because when you read the book, I don't want to give away all the material of the book, but I was going through a particularly difficult period in my life which involved life and death. And it seemed to me, when I had written an earlier book of mine called Being Hindu, many young people asked me that all this is very, and I wrote a book on Vivekananda, many young people asked me, all this is very good, Swami Vivekananda said this, and Ramana Maharishi said something else. Wonderful. But we are neither Swami Vivekananda nor Ramana Maharishi. We all have to lead imperfect, messy, troubled lives. You have to try and tell us what all of this means to us today, in this imperfect life of mine. Not if I go to Rishikesh and start meditating, not if I, go somewhere else and break away from society, not even if I'm in a quiet room for a long, long time, but in the messiness of my everyday life, how does this knowledge matter at all? And I think this is a very, very profound and deep question, because we must have the humility to accept that as profound as our ancient knowledge is, if it doesn't speak to us in this moment, in the imperfectness of our lives, then how will we access it? How can we access it? And I think there must be new modes, new ways to talk about this knowledge, which makes it accessible to many, many people. And I wrote the Ashtavakra Gita in this book and wrote about it in this book to try and explain, and the Honorable Minister mentioned one part of it on, Nachiketa and his conversation with Yama, the god of death, and many other things, to try and explain what this knowledge can do for us today. And I think there is a very fundamental thing that it can do for us today. And I'll tell you as a writer what it can do. I think we have, especially in this late stage capitalism, so to speak, we think of our work and professions as consistently giving us modes and methods to greater pride. We do more, we get better known, we perhaps make more material gains, therefore we become more important and powerful, and so on and so forth. I think in my limited work, for whatever it's worth, I think one of the great lessons has been the more you do your work, the more you realize how insignificant you truly are, and therefore how humble you ought to be. I think that's the great. If you really ask me, somebody asked me the other day, so what's the toolkit out of the Ashtavakra Gita? Now, being in Delhi, I'm very wary of the word toolkit. But having said that, let me say there is, if I were to say one key takeaway, as it were, it is to give us the understanding that as you delve deeper into this knowledge in any shape or form, you are consistently made aware of how really, in the truly cosmic sense, what a tiny little blue dot you really are. A blue dot within a blue dot, within a blue dot, within a blue dot, and we can go on. And yet, as both Bibek and the minister was saying, and yet, there is a path to true freedom if we were to choose to be free, in whatever shape and form. And this knowledge, this India's eternal knowledge and wisdom, provides us a key, a code, a password to unlock a path that shows us a glimpse of that freedom. It's a tantalizing glimpse. If you talk to, I spend a lot of time talking to monks of various orders. Ramakrishna Mission, of course, the order in which I grew up, ISKCON, an order I've got to know very well, and many others. And many monks who've spent many, many years meditating and in great spiritual work will tell you that it's like a monk once told me, it's a bit like tasting honey if you have never tasted anything sweet in your life. You realize another world is possible. And that possibility is so tantalizing, it is so breathtaking, it is so powerful that you realize that perhaps, in the proverbial frog inside that well, there are other worlds that you do not know, right? There are other worlds that are possible. And I think as we hope to do more work like this, I think the entire endeavor is to bring this knowledge and make it applicable today so that people can access it today. My last point, and this is a personal point which I really felt very strongly. I was actually grappling, when I was writing this book, grappling with a very, very serious illness of a parent of mine. And I recognized through reading the Ashtavakra Gita what death truly means. I also recognized as a Bharatiya that perhaps no child in India ever truly grows up until they are confronted with the death of a parent. As long as you do not stand on that moment, you do not attain adulthood, in my humble opinion. For me, Baba was always there. I could always pass off things to him. And yet when he really stumbled, as it were, it was a new dimension, it was a new world, it was a new life. And through it all, I think Ashtavakra Gita showed a path. And at the end of the book, you will find a little, and in the book I talk about many things, connections to this wisdom, various things in the world, and so on and so forth. But there is this wonderful thing at the end of the book, you'll find it. And this will tell you, you must ask yourself, okay, so if all of this is available, what is stopping us from accessing it, right? And there's this portion I read, which I had to put in, and you'll find it right at the end of the book. In the last lecture Jiddu Krishnamurti ever gave, he's sitting before an audience, and he finishes his lecture, and then he tells his audience, sit down quietly for a few moments. Sit down, ma'am, sit down quietly. And you see and there's a video of this available. You see the wind, pass by and his hair moves, and he looks up to the heavens. And he's urging these people to just sit there for one moment. But even before he's finished saying sit there, people have got up. And somebody's picked up their bag, somebody's opening a newspaper. And it made me think, I was in Mongolia a few months ago and I met the Khambo Lama in Ulaanbaatar. And he said to me, and it's connected so deeply with me, that all the world's problems truly, once again, as the Buddha had taught, and really, truly the Ashtavakra gives us a sense of where happiness lies in our inability, our profound inability to ever take that moment to sit quietly. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hindol. That was absolutely fantastic. We'll move on to a short discussion between the Honourable Minister, Bibek and Hindol. I'm conscious that the Minister has to leave soon, so I'll take the liberty of asking her a question, which I would then extend to Bibek and Hindol as well. Ma'am, how would you say the Ashtavakra Gita affected your life? I mean, you have obviously mentioned some of it in your talk, but what is possibly the most profound impact it's had on your life?
It's had an impact, but yet I don't think I'm in that position to say it's profound. But it has had an impact in that I'm able to tell myself that I'm here to do it. Whatever comes, as I read it out, whatever comes before me, I have to perform. And linking it with the detachment, the vairagya. I try to extricate myself from the fallout of everything that I do, because the fallout today is more than your population in terms of responses that you get, in terms of the the playback that happens. And actually this book has come timely, although I did say that from my childhood I have had some kind of an exposure. This is so handy, I'm able to get back and say, right, remove yourself from it. And that's helped me.
Thank you. I think perhaps that's one thing we should all take away from it. If I may extend the same question to Bibek.
Someone who's part of the process is within the system and can therefore never detect the changes that happen. So I've been asked this question or a similar question before, and I've always responded by saying, don't ask me. Because Adi Shankaracharya talked about this in Big Vishya Vivek. For people who are more familiar with Heisenberg, this is Heisenberg. So I always tell them, ask my wife. But how can I refuse to answer a question asked by a rishi? So my response will be, I would not look at only the Ashtavakra Gita. As you know, I have been involved in these translations for close to 20 years now, more than 20 years. Subconsciously, if not consciously, being immersed in these texts every day, day in and day out, they change you. They change you not because you are consciously trying to change, but it happens. And one of the things that happens is you become more detached. You are no longer that stirred by what is happening with the external world. You are no longer that stirred by external possessions, external relationships. You become somewhat aloof. In the process, we also have these Shadharipus: Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Mad, Matsarya. these Shadarikus have also become less important. Now, please do not misunderstand. I am nowhere near attaining Jnana. I am nowhere near attaining Mukti. But these texts, not specifically the Ashtavakra Gita, have led to some degree of Vedanta.
Thank you.
Nothing to add to that?
Yes, please, ma'am.
It cannot be better said.
Absolutely. If I may.
I'm cognizant of the fact, only too cognizant of the fact that if Bibek Debroy says that he hasn't attained Gyan, what is left for people like us to say, truly. But I must say, at a very personal level, my only key takeaway has been, to a degree, a sense of detachment from this idea of upward mobility, which I think racks our lives, especially in Delhi, that everything has to sort of take us here and there and so on and so forth. Now, I would not say that this has made me per se less ambitious or anything like that, but certainly one attains a certain perspective. Also a certain perspective to speed. I think a lot of people consider, their achievements at a particular pace, whereas I think certainly there is something to be said for things happening in the fullness of time. I think that is certainly another great lesson. And the greatest lesson, I must say, is truly being able to come face to face with what one may think of as a really, epic loss in one's life. Certainly that much is true.
Thank you, Hindol. I'll ask a final question to the Honorable Minister, and this is more for me as a publisher. Minister, I spoke about how at Grin Publishing we're trying to retell the stories of Bharat. What more can be done by us as a society, not just us as publishers, by us as a society to propagate and perhaps learn more about the history of India, the rich traditions and the stories that are there in India? You mentioned Nachiketa as one of them. We're publishing another book on Nachiketa. What more can we do as a society to really get these stories back out there and as popular as some of the current stories are?
I think it's two-way. One, you have to go around the country, meet people. There's just immense wealth of work available in regional languages. And they're rich. They're just not being read, republished. They were published. And lots of discussions I've had at least a generation or two generations ago. And when I read them now, I just wonder why they are not getting published again. But I have the answer for it. Who after all knows about these books? And therefore I would think, I commend the efforts that you are taking to do this work, but it has to be one go round, elicit more information on what wealth lies there, and equally talk about what you're doing. So, people get to knowing, and digital dissemination is also one of the very powerful tools. And afterwards, people will come back to books. I don't think books are done. It's a great pleasure to touch your book and read it and go back, page after page. But introduction through digital always helps.
Vivek, if I could just extend the same question to you, since you're the propagator of these scripts, what more can be done?
That's a tough question, because much of our knowledge was orally transmitted. It was never there in written form to start off with. And we are increasingly losing it. When we were kids, we picked up a lot through our grandparents. Because of the collapse of the joint family system, various other things, we are losing that exposure. Today's kids are losing that exposure, and today's grandparents don't know enough. So let me record that there is that oral tradition that's important. So far as the texts are concerned, Namami, the National Manuscript Mission, estimates that there are 40 million Puthis, manuscripts floating around in India, 95% of which have not been translated. So part of GRIM's objective should be to publish the ones that have not been published. Because the texts that are published, they seem to follow the bell curve, that I publish what is the model one and I republish those. I ignore the rest. Let me conclude by citing the example that is my favorite. I have a copy of a 13th century manuscript copy called Chaurya Shastram. As the title implies, it's a manual for thieves. Were agreed to publish it, it would amount to a book of about 450 pages. So we have no idea of the kind of stuff that was written, because we do not translate, and increasingly the medium is becoming English, particularly for the younger generation, and there's a global audience too. So we do not publish, we do not know what is in this text, including the knowledge, and we denigrate it simply because we do not know.
Thank you, Bibek. That's fascinating. And I think we'll definitely take that up. I'm conscious the Minister has to leave now. I would like to once again thank the Honorable Finance Minister of India, Nirmala Sitharaman, for gracing us today and reading the book. It's truly an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I request everyone to take their seats, ladies and gentlemen? We just have another few minutes of discussion between the two authors, where we now will delve deeper into the subject. Let's start with you, Hindol. Hindol, why the Ashtavakra Gita? And then again, obviously, I'll ask Bibek as well. There are so many scriptures.
Before going into why the Ashtavakra Gita, I think we should say that this Chaurya Shastram sounds very interesting. I think I should take this opportunity to request Bibek that if he requires any help in working with this, I offer my humble self. Chaurya Shastram sounds very interesting and very apt for the Kali Yuga, should I say. So this is very, very interesting.
So please, why the Ashtavakra?
So I think not just the Ashtavakra Gita, and many, Bibek just said we're going to work on the Devi Gita and many others, hopefully. Also, there was the Honorable Minister was talking about various methodologies in which to promote this knowledge. We are looking to, Bibek has very kindly lent me his old work in translating the Puranas, some of the earliest work he did. And we are trying to figure out ways in which we can make short films and videos to bring this work alive for, in the sort of the screen generation, should I say. Why should they be, barred from this knowledge, and how to make it exciting, how to tell the stories better. And I think this is this is going to be a lifelong work. I mean, certainly it will consume my life, and hopefully Rishi's yours too. As it has, Bibek has spent all his life doing this. But I also want to acknowledge, what a privilege it was for me to work with Dr. Debroy, and what a learning process it was. We spent a lot of time talking about various things. We still do. And I actually feel that, learning happens in many, many ways. And I think just by talking to him about so many things, so many aspects of our tradition, our culture, our ideas, how we should look at our country, I think it has taught me immensely. I was never directly his student, but I really feel that in the last 2-3 years, I have learned immensely from him. And I think for which I shall always be grateful. I really feel it has, taught me a whole universe that I would have otherwise not known in this manner and form. And I think it has certainly made me more resolute to do this work with greater diligence?
The Gita, if I may. So many scriptures, you're working on many other things. But why the Ashtavakra Gita? What drew you to it?
I mentioned that I was interested in translating the Gitas. So sooner or later I would have translated the Ashtavakra Gita. The fact that I had this dinner conversation with Hindol just meant that I did the Ashtavakra Gita earlier than I would have normally done. Because after doing the translation of the Gitas in the Mahabharata, my intention was to do a translation of the Gitas in the Puranas. And maybe I would have come around to the Ashtavakra Gita after that. But the Ashtavakra Gita has always fascinated me. There is an interesting anecdote in Swami Nitya-Swarupananda's translation, which I did not mention earlier because normally it is Hindol who mentions that. That Swami Vivekananda was not yet Narendranath Datta.
Yes.
He was still Narendranath Datta. And Narendranath Datta still did not realize that potentially he was Swami Vivekananda. He used to go and visit Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna used to tell Narendranath Datta to read the Sanskrit of the Ashtavakra Gita and to translate it into Bengali for him. The objective being to awaken the latent Vedanta consciousness that was there in Narendranath Datta. Advaita Vedanta or even Vedanta is very difficult to explain to people. It is easy to explain, but it is very difficult for that explanation to make itself felt. And the example that I give is Advaita Vedanta, if I'm going to use a metaphor, is like sweetness. So Rishi asks me, what is sweetness? I give all kinds of answers. Makes no sense. Then I say, drink this fresh lime with soda. And now Rishi says, okay, now it's beginning to make sense. Then I give Rishi a cube of sugar. And Rishi says, now I understand what sweetness is. So Advaita Vedanta is a bit like that sweetness. And for most people, it is difficult to relate to that sweetness. Which is why Ashtavakra Gita is popular and is read, particularly amongst sannyasis of the Vedanta tradition. But Hindol and I both think that Ashtavakra Gita deserves to be read more widely, even if the lessons are somewhat difficult to accept and understand.
I just want to add one thing to that, if I may. You know, the Ashtavakra Gita is one thing, even if you don't know anything about the Ashtavakra Gita, one story of the Ashtavakra Gita you may have heard is this whole thing about mistaking a rope for a snake, or the rope snake story, so to speak, right? And you know, of course, the moral, as it were, of that story is that, you know, we fail to perceive, whether you want to call it reality, truth, the divine, whatever you want to call it, right? And I think it is with parables, as it were, or lessons like this, that we can bring these profound texts and their profound knowledge alive in our own sort of mundane existence. You know, when I read the Ashtavakra Gita and started writing about it, it occurred to me that there must be so much, and there is in fact so much of rope in my life which I'm mistaking as snake. And if all of you, each one of you, spent a few minutes thinking about this, you will recognize there is today, or there has been in the past, so many ropes in your life that turned out just to be ropes, which we all, or you all, or we all thought as snakes, right? And what is the allied idea that we're talking about there? It's this idea of fear. You know, this fear, many monks will tell you that one of the greatest things about spiritual life is that it peels away fear. We think of fear as a switch, either you have it or you don't, but actually perhaps fear is like peeling an onion. Slowly, layers upon layer of your accumulated fear goes away from your system until you're left truly free. And this fear we gather over experiences, hurts, disappointments, all kinds of things. Perhaps even excitement, but actually something turned out to be good, but we were so scared about it for a long time. And this is true for all our lives, without exception, right? And I think the Ashtavakra Gita in its lesson, and I want to focus on this one thing, the rope and the snake, reminds us again and again when you read it, that there may be ropes in your life that you consider snakes. And realization of the truth would include realizing that they are just a piece of string, you know?
Thank you, Hindol. On that note, I think we will conclude today's proceedings. The authors will be signing books outside if anybody would like to purchase a copy and get it signed. I would once again like to thank the India International Center, Usha ji, Rajiv ji, the entire team. I would like to thank NewsX, Rishab Kulati and his entire team. Thank you so much for collaborating with us. And last but not the least, thank you so much to the audience for coming and making this an engaging and fantastic session. Thank you so much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.